Kaima turned over and froze. There was a man lying beside her. Not just any man. The cold billionaire who owned the luxury resort where she had been fired the night before. Kaima shot upright and looked down at herself. Her blouse was buttoned wrongly, one shoe was missing, and her handbag was somehow sitting inside a flower vase. Then the man beside her opened his eyes. He stared at her. She stared back at him. Neither of them could remember how they had ended up in the same bed. The last thing Kaima remembered was secretly pouring herself a shot of whiskey in his office, only for him to walk in, reveal that he had been watching her through the security camera, and pour her another one. One drink became several. Their conversation became a competition over whose life was more miserable. And now, the poor cleaner was waking up beside one of the richest and most feared men in the country. "What happened last night?" he asked. Kaima tightened the bedsheet around herself and glared at him. "You own the bed. You tell me." Neither of them knew that nothing had happened between them. But that drunken misunderstanding was about to bring Kaima into his mansion, place her directly in the path of his suspicious teenage daughter, and turn three lonely strangers into the family none of them knew they needed. If you want to see how far one impossible morning can take two lonely people, stay with me to the end. And if this story moves you, please subscribe. I'm working toward my first 1,000 subscribers. The evening before had started like every other evening in Kaima's life, with her running. She ran from her last accounting class to the bus stop. Ran from the bus stop to the staff entrance of the resort. Ran up 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was reserved for guests. And by the time she reached the housekeeping floor, she was 11 minutes late and drenched in sweat that had nothing to do with the weather. Ryu Song-pil was already waiting for her, arms folded, his badge gleaming under the lobby lights like a small trophy of his own importance. 11 minutes, he said, before she could even apologize. "Do you know how many times this month?" 6, Kaima said quietly. "I know. I'm sorry. My class ran late, and the bus. I don't want to hear about your bus." He said it loudly enough that 2 other cleaners glanced over from the linen cart. "This is a 5-star resort, Kaima. Guests pay a fortune to stay here. We cannot have staff who treat their shifts like a suggestion." "I've never missed a shift," Kaima said. "I've been late." "There's a difference." "Not to me." He pulled a folded paper from his clipboard, and she understood, before he even said it, that it was already decided. "You're done. Turn in your uniform at the front desk." She could have told him that she was late because she was studying to become an accountant so that one day she would not need to clean anyone's floors, or told him about the 3 jobs she had juggled since arriving in this country. The tuition due in 11 days, and the landlord who had started leaving notes under her door. She could have told them all of it. She didn't. Some things, she had learned, were not safe to hand to people who had already decided you were worthless. "Fine," she said, and walked past him with her chin high, though her eyes had already begun to sting. She did not see the tall man in the dark coat until she nearly walked straight into him at the glass doors. He stepped back smoothly, unbothered, the way a man moves when nothing in his life has ever truly startled him. Kaima caught the scent of expensive cologne and the flash of a face she recognized from framed photographs in the lobby. Kwon Tae-jayam, the resort's owner, arriving for a meeting he was, as always, 5 minutes early for. "Excuse me," she muttered, and pushed through the door before he could reply. He watched her go. Then he watched the tears she thought no one had seen. "Song-pil," he said, without turning around. "What happened to that woman?" The manager straightened his jacket. "Just a cleaner, sir. Chronic lateness. I let her go." "How chronic?" 6 times this month." Tae-jayam said nothing for a moment. In his experience, people who lied about small things did it with more polish than someone who had simply run out of grace. The woman's tears had not looked like guilt. They had looked like exhaustion. "Bring her back," he said. "Sir, I have a meeting in 10 minutes. Have someone find her, and have her wait in my office." Song-pil did not ask why. Nobody asked Kwon Tae-jayam why. They simply obeyed, the way people in this city had learned to obey a man whose name alone could close a business or open a door, depending on his mood. Na Jiam-su found Kaima at the bus stop, still in her wrinkled uniform, staring at her phone with the particular stillness of someone doing math she did not want to do. "Miss Kaima," he said, and when she looked up, startled, he offered the smallest, most reassuring smile he had. "Mr. Kwan would like a word. It won't take long." "Am I in more trouble?" "I don't believe so," Na Jiam-su said honestly. "Though with him, it's hard to say. He doesn't explain himself to me either." She almost refused. She had nothing left to give this resort, and certainly nothing left to give its terrifying owner. But there was a small, stubborn part of her that wanted answers, and an even smaller part that was simply too tired to argue. She followed him back inside. His office was the kind of room that made a person very aware of how many years of tuition they still owed. Kaima sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than her rent and stared at the door, waiting. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. Her eyes drifted, without her permission, to the crystal decanter on the sideboard. Whiskey, amber and glowing under the lamplight, the kind of bottle that existed only in advertisements she had scrolled past 1,000 times without ever expecting to be in the same room as one. She told herself she would not touch it. She told herself that for a full 3 minutes. Then she stood, walked to the sideboard as though her legs had made the decision without consulting her, and poured herself the smallest shot she could manage, hands trembling slightly from the day's humiliation. She looked at it. It seemed pathetically small for what she had just survived. She poured a little more, reasoning, with the particular logic of the deeply exhausted, that her hand had clearly not been steady enough the first time, and this was simply a correction. She heard the door and spun around, hiding the glass behind her back so quickly that a few drops splashed onto the carpet. Kwan Tae-jiam did not look angry. He looked, if anything, faintly entertained, which was somehow worse. "You can stop hiding it," he said. "I've been watching you for the last 10 minutes. He nodded toward a small camera mounted discreetly near the bookshelf. "Security feed. I saw the first pour. And the correction." Kaima's face went hot. "I can pay for it." "With what?" he asked, not unkindly. "You were just fired." She said nothing, because there was nothing dignified to say. He walked to the sideboard, took a second glass, and poured himself a shot. A real one, not a nervous one. Then poured her another, properly this time, and held it out. "Since you've already started," he said, "you may as well not drink alone. Are you going to fire me twice in one night? You don't work for me anymore. I can't fire what I don't own." He sat on the edge of his desk. "I want to know why a woman who clearly does not want to steal anything felt she had no choice but to steal a drink." And so she told him. Not everything. Not the landlord's notes. Not the growing fear that she might have to leave school entirely. But enough. The classes. The tuition deadline. The buses that never ran on time in the direction she needed. The manager who had never once asked why she was late, only assumed the laziest possible reason. "I'm not lazy," she said, more to herself than to him. "I've never had the luxury of being lazy." Tae-jiam turned the glass in his hand. "I have a 16-year-old daughter who has not eaten breakfast with me in 4 months," he said. "I run 12 companies. I can move money across 3 continents before lunch. I cannot make one teenage girl sit at a table with me for 20 minutes. Kaima almost laughed. "That's not the same as owing rent." "No," he agreed. "It's worse. Rent has a number. My daughter doesn't come with one. Try telling that to my landlord. Try telling my daughter that owning a resort is easier than being liked by her." They went back and forth like that, half arguing, half laughing, each one certain their own misery outranked the others, and somewhere in the exchange, the first bottle emptied, and a second one, quietly, appeared. Neither of them would ever agree, afterward, on exactly whose idea that had been. By the time they stood to leave, both of them were far looser than either had intended, laughing at something neither could later recall, and profoundly unable to locate the exit of a building he owned. "I built this hallway," Taejayam announced with great dignity, "and it has moved. Your handbag is safer in a vase," he told her firmly. At some later point, and for reasons she could never reconstruct, she agreed completely. Somewhere in the middle of it, before the second bottle appeared, Taejayam had asked her, with the particular bluntness of a man 3 drinks past his own caution, why she had never simply asked her family back home for help. "Because there's no one left to ask," Kaima said, and for a moment the humor drained out of the room entirely. "My mother did everything alone for as long as I can remember. I learned from her that asking is a last resort, not a first one." "And is this a last resort?" he asked. "Sitting in my office, drinking my whiskey, telling a stranger things you haven't told your own classmates? This is what happens when a person runs out of first resorts," she admitted. "You're just unlucky enough to be in the room when it happens." He had laughed at that, a real laugh, rougher and less polished than the ones he offered at business dinners. "I don't think I've been called unlucky by someone I just fired an apology to. I didn't apologize. You will. Eventually. Everyone does. Not me," she said, and something in her certainty made him look at her a beat too long. The way a man looks at a fact he isn't used to encountering. They argued, after that, about smaller things, whether soul traffic or her city's buses were the greater national embarrassment, whether raising a teenager was closer to running a hostile takeover or surviving one, whether whiskey tasted better with ice or was simply ruined by it. Neither of them remembered agreeing to open the second bottle. Both of them would later insist, with complete confidence, that it had been the other person's idea. Na Jae-soo found them 20 minutes later sitting on the corridor floor, deep in an extremely serious debate about whether final exams or teenage daughters were the greater threat to human sanity. Kaima had removed one shoe, insisting the floor was moving less without it. Taejayam had, at some point, placed her handbag inside a decorative flower vase for what he called safekeeping. With the help of a female staff member, Na Jae-soo guided them both into the nearest available room, Taejayam's private suite, and left them, fully dressed, on opposite sides of the enormous bed, assuming, reasonably, that 2 grown adults would remember the details of their own evening. He did not think to mention any of this to either of them the next morning, because it did not occur to him that they wouldn't ask. Which was how Kaima came to wake up, hours later, beside the most feared man in the city, absolutely certain that her life had just become a catastrophe. "I don't remember anything after the second bottle," Taejayam admitted, sitting up and rubbing his temple as though his own skull had personally betrayed him. "I don't remember a first bottle," Kaima said. "I remember a shot glass, and then I remember waking up in a stranger's bed with one shoe missing. I'm not a stranger. You know my name. Knowing your name doesn't make this less humiliating." They sat in tense, mortified silence for a moment, each privately assembling the worst possible version of events, neither willing to say the word aloud. "We should be adults about this," Taejayam finally said. "We should never speak of this again," Kaima corrected. He arranged for her to leave through a private exit, away from the staff who would recognize her uniform and draw the obvious, humiliating conclusion. At the door, he pressed a thick envelope into her hands. "For tuition," he said. "And for the trouble." Kaima looked down at the envelope, then up at him, and something in her expression went cold in a way that had nothing to do with embarrassment. "You think I want to be paid for last night? That's not. I have been poor for a long time, Mr. Kwon. I have never once sold my dignity for it, and I am not going to start this morning." She pushed the envelope back into his chest. "Keep your money. I didn't wake up in your bed for a fee." She left before he could find an answer, which surprised him more than anything else that morning had. In his experience, everyone accepted whatever he offered. No one had ever handed it back. He fixed what he could fix the only way he knew how, with instructions. He ordered Songpil to reinstate her. Kaima refused to return to a resort managed by a man who had humiliated her in front of colleagues the moment his employer took an interest in her. That would only make things worse, not better. So Taejayam created something else, a cleaning position at his mansion, with wages nearly double what the resort had paid, working hours built around her class schedule, and staff accommodation close enough to campus that she could stop losing 2 hours a day to buses. Kaima suspected it immediately for what it looked like, a kindness with strings sewn invisibly into the fabric. "I don't want you close," Taejayam told her when she raised the suspicion directly. He said it fast and not at all convincingly, and she noted, with some private amusement she did not share, that a man who could silence a boardroom with a single sentence had just failed spectacularly to lie to a cleaner. "Then you won't mind putting everything in writing," she said. She listed her terms without apology. A formal contract, clearly defined duties, fixed wages that did not fluctuate with his moods, guaranteed time off, protected study hours, and she made him write this one down himself. Written confirmation that the accommodation would never be used as leverage over her. "No secret tuition payments," she added. "If you ever quietly pay my school behind my back, I will find out, and I will leave." "You negotiate like you run a company," he said, mildly impressed despite himself. "I negotiate like someone who has been taken advantage of before," she said. "I'd rather be alone than owned." "I've had lawyers negotiate less thoroughly than this," he said, scanning the list a second time. "Your lawyers aren't the ones who'll be sleeping under your roof," she pointed out. "I am. I'd like to know exactly what that means before I agree to it." "Fair." He reached for a pen. "Anything else?" "One more thing." She met his eyes directly. "If this ever stops being about a job, I want to be the one who decides that. Not you. And not your reputation deciding it for me through gossip I never agreed to." He set the pen down for a moment, studying her with an expression she couldn't quite place, something between respect and quiet unease, as though she'd just described a scenario he hadn't let himself imagine yet. "Agreed," he said finally, and signed. He signed every line without argument, and told himself it was simply good business. He did not examine too closely why he had personally handled the paperwork instead of leaving it to his lawyers, or why he had scheduled her start date for the following morning instead of the following week. Kaima moved into the mansion staff quarters under the watchful, quietly delighted supervision of Yeom Mokhui, the elderly head housekeeper, who took one look at the arrangement and said nothing at all, which, in a house full of people who noticed everything, was its own kind of statement. Her first morning, Yeom Mokhui handed her a set of keys, a schedule, and a single piece of advice. "Clean the floors. Mind your own business. And whatever you do," the older woman said, eyes twinkling, "don't let him convince you that carrying his coffee upstairs is part of your duties. He has hands. He has legs. He simply prefers company." "Is that a warning?" "It's an observation," Yeom Mokhui said. "Take from it what you like." Kaima quickly learned that the mansion ran on rhythms very different from the resort's, quieter, stricter in some ways, looser in others. She learned which hallways Harayan avoided and which rooms Taejayam hadn't properly used since his wife had died, the kind of knowledge no one told her directly, but that revealed itself in the way certain doors stayed permanently closed. She also learned, within her first week, that being paid fairly did not mean being treated as an equal by everyone in the house. One of the senior drivers made a point of reminding her, twice, that she was still just staff, whatever Mr. Kwan thinks he's doing. Kama said nothing back. She had learned long ago that some battles were not worth the breath they cost, and this was one of them. She had a contract, a schedule, and a plan, and she intended to let all three speak for her instead. What she hadn't planned for was how quickly the mansion would start to feel less like a temporary arrangement and more like the strange, uneven beginning of a life she hadn't known she wanted. Hey Ryan noticed the change before anyone said a word about it. Her father, who had not stepped inside the east sitting room in over a year, suddenly had opinions about the curtains. He asked the new cleaner whether the cushions were too firm. He wandered into the kitchen one evening, already holding a full glass of water, apparently searching for water. We watched all of this over the rim of her tea with the patient amusement of a woman who had seen a great many things in this house and found this, easily, the funniest. Hey Ryan did not find it funny. Let me guess, she said, cornering Kaima in the hallway on her second day. You think if you clean nicely enough, you'll end up wearing my mother's ring. Kaima kept folding the towel in her hands. I came here to clean, not to inherit anything. That's what they all say at first. I don't know what the others said. I only know what I'm saying. Kaima met her eyes, steady and unbothered. I'm not interested in your father's money, and I'm definitely not interested in fighting a 16-year-old for a house I don't want. Hey Ryan had expected fear, or flattery, or the nervous over-explaining most staff offered her. She had not expected to be looked at so plainly, as though she were simply a person and not a landmine to be carefully avoided. She tested Kaima anyway, the way she had tested every woman who had ever gotten close to her father. She left her clothes scattered like traps across her bedroom floor. She changed her meal requests 3 times in one evening. She spoke to Kaima as though she were furniture, and then acted astonished when Kaima did not disappear like the others had. I'm not here to pick up after a perfectly healthy teenager who is capable of using a hamper, Kaima told her flatly. The 4th time, she found clothes flung deliberately across the hallway. I clean this house. I don't follow you around fixing the messes you make on purpose. Hey Ryan blinked. Nobody spoke to her like that. Most adults in this house flinched at her tone before she'd even finished a sentence, terrified of upsetting the boss's daughter. You work for my father, she said, testing the ground again. I work for this household, Kaima corrected. That includes respecting the people in it. It does not include being your servant. It was, oddly, the first honest conversation Hey Ryan had had with an adult in months, disguised as an argument about laundry. She kept watching, kept testing, kept waiting for the mask to slip and reveal the gold digger she was certain lived underneath. It never did. Kaima never flattered her, never feared her, never tried, even once, to insert herself into the space that had belonged to Hey Ryan's mother. What Kaima did do, without ever announcing it as a strategy, was notice things. She noticed the photograph Hey Ryan kept hidden inside a school folder instead of proudly displayed like a normal keepsake. A woman with Hey Ryan's same sharp eyes, laughing at something outside the frame. She noticed that Hey Ryan flinched, very slightly, whenever a new woman's name came up in her father's schedule. She understood, without needing it explained to her, exactly what kind of fear made a girl leave clothes on the floor as a test. Grief did not always look like tears. Sometimes it looked like a 16-year-old daring the world to prove, once again, that everyone eventually left. Once, dusting a shelf in the study Tajayam rarely used, Kaima found a small collection of framed photographs turned face down, gathering quiet dust instead of light. She didn't touch them, but she mentioned it, carefully, to Iom Okehui. He put those away after the funeral, the older woman said. Couldn't look at them without falling apart in front of Hey Ryan. He thought hiding his grief was protecting her. I've always thought it did the opposite. She grew up believing her own grief had to be hidden too, since her father never let it show. Kaima thought about that for days afterward, and eventually, without announcing any grand intention, she righted one of the frames herself while cleaning, leaving it standing upright on the shelf where anyone passing could see it. She said nothing about it to Hey Ryan. But a few days later, she noticed the girl had righted the rest of them herself, and had even added a small vase of fresh flowers beside the frames, tending to them quietly, the way people tend to graves they've finally allowed themselves to visit. Kaima never pushed. She simply stayed, evening after evening, unimpressed by tantrums and unbothered by silence. Until one night, she found Ryan struggling over a school finance project at the kitchen table, chewing her pen in visible frustration. "You're overcomplicating the compound interest," Kaima said, glancing at the paper without being invited to. "I didn't ask you. You didn't have to. It's wrong from line 3. Kaima sat down across from her. "I'll show you the formula. I won't do it for you." She meant it. For the next hour, she explained, redirected, and refused every attempt Ryan made to simply hand over the problem and let someone else solve it. "Why won't you just do it?" Ryan finally snapped, exhausted. "Because then it would be my grade, not yours," Kaima said simply. "I respect you too much to steal your work, even to make my life easier." Ryan didn't say thank you, but she didn't throw more clothes on the floor after that, either. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, after Kaima's evening classes, a different kind of honesty had begun to grow. Taejayam found reasons to be awake when she came home. A report he was still reviewing. A tea he was still drinking at 11 at night. Kaima noticed and said nothing because she had begun, against every instinct she had, to enjoy those 10 minutes at the counter more than she wanted to admit. "You realize the entire staff thinks you've developed an unusual passion for lukewarm tea," she told him once. "I have always loved tea," he said, with the straight face of a man who had never once finished a cup in his life before that week. They talked about small things and, eventually, larger ones. Loneliness. The particular exhaustion of starting over. The strange loneliness of having enough money to solve any problem except the ones that actually mattered. "You have a luxury midlife crisis," Kaima told him once, only half joking. "Most people your age worry about their pension. You worry about whether your own daughter likes you." "I would trade the pension concerns gladly," he said. "At least those come with a spreadsheet." She helped him see, slowly, what he had been too close to see himself. That Ryan did not need another gift, or another driver, or another tutor. She needed him, present, ordinary, unimpressive, at her actual dinner table. One night, after a particularly long day, Taejayam found Kaima at the counter grading practice problems she'd printed for herself, and instead of retreating to his study, he sat down across from her, uninvited, and simply stayed. "Don't you have an empire to run?" she asked, not looking up. "The empire can wait 10 minutes. 10 minutes, is it? Very generous." "I'm a generous man," he said, straight-faced, and she laughed despite herself. They fell into an easy rhythm those nights, half work, half conversation, the kind of ordinary closeness neither of them had experienced with anyone in years. He asked, once, what she planned to do once she'd finished her degree, half expecting an answer built around ambition and title. "I want to help people who look at a spreadsheet the way I used to look at whiskey," she said. "Something they're terrified of, that could actually save them. If someone just explained it plainly instead of making them feel stupid for not already knowing." That's not a very profitable ambition. Not everything has to be profitable. Some things just have to be useful. He turned that over for longer than the comment probably deserved, aware, in some quiet corner of himself, that he had built an entire empire around profit and had somehow never once asked whether it was useful to anyone beyond his shareholders. "You make me want to be a better landlord to my own life," he admitted once, and Kaima had laughed so hard at the phrasing that he'd threatened, entirely without heat, to fire her on the spot, again, for the second time. It was in these small, unremarkable hours, tea going cold, homework half-graded, laughter that came easier each time, that whatever was growing between them stopped being an accident and started being a choice. The real turning point came with the fencing championship. Taejayam promised to attend. He meant it, the way he always meant his promises to his daughter, right up until an urgent meeting landed on his calendar for the exact same afternoon, and the meeting, as it always did, won. Ryan said nothing when he told her. She only nodded, the particular flat nod of someone who had stopped being surprised a long time ago, And later that evening, Kaima saw her toss an extra spectator ticket into the kitchen bin without a word. Kaima retrieved it after Hey Ryan had gone upstairs. She did not tell Taejayam. She knew almost nothing about fencing. She cheered once when Hey Ryan's opponent scored, drawing a withering look from the row of serious, blazer-clad parents around her, and spent the rest of the match 1/2 second behind everyone else's applause, guessing at the rules from context. Hey Ryan, mid-match, glanced toward the seat reserved for her father. Empty, as expected. Then she saw the woman sitting beside it, cheering slightly too loud and slightly too late, and something in her chest loosened in a way she did not have a name for yet. She won. Afterward, mask under her arm, sweat still on her brow, she found Kaima waiting near the exit. "You didn't have to come," she said, not quite meeting her eyes. "No," Kaima agreed. "I didn't. So why did you?" Kaima considered the question honestly before she answered it. No child should have to search a crowd and believe nobody came for her. Hey Ryan hugged her before she could stop herself, quick, fierce, over almost before it began, and pulled away just as fast, embarrassed, muttering something about the mask strap being tangled in Kaima's sleeve. It was the first time she had let anyone this close since her mother died. In the weeks that followed the championship, Hey Ryan's tests didn't disappear entirely. Old habits rarely vanish all at once, but they softened into something closer to teasing than sabotage. She started leaving her school books in the kitchen not to provoke Kaima, but because she'd begun doing homework there most evenings, drawn, without quite admitting it, to the company. "You're not going to ask me about my day, are you?" Hey Ryan said one evening, not looking up from her textbook. "Do you want me to?" "No." A pause. "Maybe. A little." Kaima set a cup of tea beside her without comment and let the silence do the asking instead. Eventually, without prompting, Hey Ryan mentioned a friend who had stopped speaking to her and a coach who thought she wasn't training hard enough, and, very quietly, that she sometimes still set the table for 4 out of habit before remembering there were only 3 of them. Kaima didn't offer comfort dressed up as advice. She simply listened, the way she wished someone had listened to her during her own hardest years, and let Hey Ryan arrive at her own conclusions in her own time. "You're strange," Hey Ryan told her once, not unkindly. "Every other adult in this house either flatters me or fears me. You just talk to me like I'm a person." "That's because you are one," Kaima said. "An occasionally insufferable one. But a person." Hey Ryan laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her, and something between them settled a little further into place. When Taejayam saw the photographs from the championship, Hey Ryan's coach had sent them proudly to the family group chat. Unaware of the wound he'd just reopened, his stomach dropped in a way no boardroom failure had ever managed. There, in the 3rd row, in a chair meant for him, sat Kaima, mid-cheer, one fist raised at entirely the wrong moment. He found Kaima in the garden that evening, unusually quiet. "You went," he said. It wasn't a question. Someone had to sit in that chair. "I had a meeting." "Children don't remember your meetings," Kaima said, gently, but without softening the truth. "They remember the empty chair. That's what stays with them, not the reason you weren't in it." He didn't argue. He simply absorbed it, the way a man absorbs something he already knew but had never let himself hear out loud. He changed, slowly and imperfectly, the way real change happens. He moved his first meeting later so he could eat breakfast across from his daughter instead of a stack of reports. He showed up at a parent evening at her school and sat in the back, listening more than talking, for possibly the first time in years. He asked Hey Ryan about a friend's name instead of assuming he already knew it. He stopped believing that money could stand in for a Tuesday morning. The changes weren't always graceful. He asked Hey Ryan, at one breakfast, whether she was still doing the sword thing, and was met with a withering stare that reminded him exactly how much ground he had to cover. "It's called fencing," she said. "I've been doing it for 4 years." "I know that," he said, and then, after a pause, admitted, "I didn't know it was 4 years." 3 years, 8 months, she corrected, and something in her tone told him she had been keeping count long before he'd started paying attention. He didn't make excuses. He simply started asking better questions after that, and slowly, awkwardly, began to learn the actual shape of his daughter's life. Her favorite opponent to beat, the coach she privately thought was too harsh, the university programs she'd quietly started researching without telling him. It cost him nothing in money and everything in attention, and for the first time he began to understand which currency his daughter had actually been asking him to pay in all along. His feelings for Kaima grew alongside the changes, tangled together so thoroughly that neither of them could say, later, which had caused which. He tried the only language he knew for affection first: gifts. A necklace arrived one afternoon, tasteful and absurdly expensive. Kaima handed it back the same day. "I didn't ask for this. I wanted to thank you." "Then say thank you. You don't need diamonds for 2 syllables." Undeterred, he sent flowers next, an arrangement so large it required 2 staff members to carry it into the entrance hall. Kaima took one look at it and burst out laughing. "Taejayam, this looks like someone in this house has died. I was trying to be generous. Try being honest instead. That's the only thing I'll actually accept." He stood there, faintly baffled, a man who had built an empire on knowing exactly what people wanted, undone entirely by a woman who wanted nothing he knew how to give. "Honesty," he repeated slowly, as though testing the shape of the word. So, one evening in the garden, he gave it to her. He told her that he had not let himself care for anyone since his wife died, that loving someone new had always felt, in some quiet corner of his chest, like proof that his wife had mattered less than he'd promised her she would. "I thought loving again would be a betrayal," he admitted. "Of her. Of Hey Ryan's memory of her. Continuing to live isn't betrayal," Kaima said softly. "It's just what living looks like after." She told him, in turn, why she had refused every envelope, every necklace, every gift dressed up as affection. She had watched money become a leash before, had seen people offer help with one hand while quietly tightening their grip with the other. She did not want to be loved the way a possession is loved. "I won't ever try to buy you," he said. "I promise you that." The kiss that followed was nothing like the blur of their first night. It was slow, careful, and entirely remembered, his hand at her jaw, her breath catching before his did, both of them fully aware, for once, of exactly what was happening and choosing it anyway. Neither of them saw Hey Ryan standing in the doorway until it was too late. She said nothing. She simply turned and walked away, and the sound of her bedroom door closing upstairs was louder than any argument could have been. The next morning, her old fear returned in full force. "I actually started to like you," she told Kaima, voice tight and furious in a way that was really just grief wearing anger's clothes. "And this whole time you were just working your way toward him." "Hey Ryan, don't." She backed away. "I don't want to hear it." Kaima didn't chase her and didn't defend herself with more words than the moment could hold. She recognized, painfully, exactly what this was. Not cruelty, but fear, doing what fear always does when it feels a family shifting beneath its feet. That night, she asked Taejayam for something that cost him more than any of his money ever had. "Don't force her to accept this," she said. "Let her be angry. Let her be scared. If this is real, it will survive her fear. If we rush her, we'll lose her." He nodded, though it clearly pained him to do nothing at all. Ryu Songpil had never stopped resenting Kaima. He had fired her without a second thought, certain he'd rid the resort of a careless employee, only to watch her rise into a position at the mansion itself, better paid and better treated than he had ever been. When word reached him, through a housekeeper's careless comment, about the morning after that first drunken night, he did not need much encouragement to start talking. Woke up in his suite the very night she was fired. He told anyone who would listen, at the resort, at the staff canteen, at a dinner with old colleagues. Convenient, isn't it? Fired one evening, moved into his mansion within the week. He never said anything technically false. He simply left out everything that mattered. The terms she had demanded, the contract she had insisted on, the money she had refused. Truth, stripped of context, can do as much damage as a lie. The story spread the way gossip always does, gathering unearned certainty as it traveled. By the time it reached Kaima's classmates, it had hardened into fact. The poor cleaner had slept her way into a fortune. "Is it true your tuition's being paid by him?" A classmate asked her outright one afternoon, not unkindly, simply curious. "No," Kaima said, jaw tight. "I pay for my own school. I always have." But the whispers didn't need her denial to survive. She caught the looks in lecture halls, some pitying, some judging, none of them seeing the years of exhaustion that had actually built her life. It infuriated her in a way poverty itself never had. Poverty she could fight with discipline and patience. This, the casual erasure of everything she'd earned, she had no weapon against it all. The worst of it came during a group project presentation, when a classmate she barely knew made a pointed comment in front of the whole seminar room about some people not needing to worry about their grades, since they've got other ways of getting ahead. A few students laughed. Kaima felt her face go hot, the old, familiar heat of being reduced to a rumor in front of an audience. She didn't shout. She didn't cry, though it cost her something to hold both back. "I've turned in every assignment this semester on time," she said, evenly, to the room rather than to the classmate who'd spoken. "I've done every reading. If you have a specific problem with my work, I'm happy to hear it. If the problem is a rumor you heard secondhand, I'd rather you kept it outside this classroom." The professor, to her credit, moved the discussion along without further comment, but Kaima walked home that afternoon replaying the moment until her jaw ached from clenching it. It wasn't the cruelty that hurt most. It was how easily people believed the version of her that required no effort to imagine. The poor woman who'd found a shortcut, over the version that was actually true, the one that had cost her years of exhaustion to build. She said none of this to Taejayam at first, not wanting to hand him one more reason to feel he needed to fix it for her. But Eom Okiwi noticed the tightness in her shoulders one evening and, without asking permission, sat beside her at the kitchen table. "You don't have to carry it alone just to prove you can," the older woman said simply. "Strength isn't the same as silence." It was, in its own quiet way, exactly what Kaima needed to hear. "Let me handle it," Taejayam said, when she finally told him how bad it had gotten. His voice had the particular flatness of a man already calculating which lawyers to call, which reputations to end. "I can make this disappear by tomorrow." "No," Kaima said sharply. "I don't want people silenced into pretending they respect me. I want to actually be respected. Those aren't the same thing, and you of all people should know that. Then what do you want me to do?" "Nothing for now. This is mine to survive." But surviving it, she realized slowly, meant something had to change. Living inside his mansion had begun to make her achievements invisible, swallowed whole by his name, his wealth, his reputation. No one asked about her grades anymore. They only asked about her address. She packed her things and rented a modest room near campus, close enough to walk to her classes, far enough from his name to breathe under her own again. Taejayam took it as rejection, the oldest wound reopening in a new shape. "You leave every time I try to take care of you," he said, the anger in his voice thin cover for something closer to fear. "I'm not leaving you," Kaima said. "I'm leaving the version of this where I disappear into your name. I love you. That's not the argument. The argument is that I need to know I can stand beside you as myself, not as a rumor about you. You're confusing my care with control, and you're confusing control with love. They're not the same thing either." He was quiet for a long moment, the anger draining out of him and leaving something rawer behind. "My wife never had to protect herself from me," he said finally. "She never had to fight to be seen as her own person. I don't know how to do this differently. I only know how to take care of people by giving them things." "Then learn." Kaima said, gentler now, though no less firm. Not for me. For Hey Ryan too. Money answers some questions. It has never once answered the ones that actually matter. Whether someone is proud of who they are, whether they trust that they're wanted for themselves and not for what they can be given. And if I learn, he asked, quieter still, will you come back? I don't know yet, she admitted, and the honesty of it hurt them both. I need to know I can survive without you before I decide to stay with you. Otherwise, all of this is just a prettier kind of dependence. He didn't have an answer for that. Not yet. And to his credit, he didn't try to invent one just to fill the silence. He simply nodded and let her go, though it cost him more than any deal he had ever walked away from. Hey Ryan heard enough of the argument through the hallway to understand, for the first time, what Kaima had actually been protecting all along. A woman chasing money did not walk away from a mansion. A woman chasing her own dignity did. In the weeks that followed, Hey Ryan noticed something else. Kaima had kept helping with her schoolwork by message, had remembered the date of her next fencing match, had never once used the distance as an excuse to disappear from her life the way every other woman eventually had. She went to Kaima's rented room without telling her father. I was wrong, she said, the moment the door opened, before she could lose her nerve. About all of it. Kaima let her in without a word and put the kettle on. I thought if I let myself love you, it meant I was letting go of my mother. Hey Ryan admitted, staring at her hands. Like there wasn't room for both. There's always room, Kaima said. I was never trying to replace her. I don't want her chair. I only ever wanted to earn my own. Come home, Hey Ryan said quietly. Please. My dad's insufferable without you. Kaima smiled, but shook her head gently. Not yet. Not until he and I figure out how to build this without either of us disappearing into the other. When we do, I promise you, I'll be there. Hey Ryan nodded, and for the first time, it wasn't fear that made her leave the conversation there. It was trust. The truth came out, as most long-buried truths do, by accident. Najayam Su was reviewing old security logs for an unrelated matter when he overheard Kaima and Taejayam in the middle of yet another careful, half-joking conversation about that first night, clearly still operating under the belief that something had happened between them. He nearly dropped his tablet. Wait, he said, stepping into the room without waiting to be invited. You two still think you slept together? Taejayam frowned. We woke up in the same bed. You woke up in the same bed because I put you there, Najayam Su said, in the tone of a man finally getting to unload a secret he had been carrying, bewildered, for months. Fully dressed. Both of you. I found you sitting on the corridor floor arguing about whether exams or teenage daughters were worse for a person's sanity. Miss Kaima had removed one shoe because she said the floor was moving. You, he pointed at Taejayam, put her handbag in a flower vase and called it the safest location in the building. Kaima's mouth fell open. Nothing happened. Nothing happened, Najayam Su confirmed. You were both far too busy arguing about accounting exams to do anything else. I assumed you remembered. Why didn't either of you just ask me? I didn't think to ask the security chief for our own memories, Kaima said faintly, sinking into a chair, torn between fury and hysterical relief. I have spent months believing I made the worst mistake of my life. I have spent months feeling guilty for not remembering falling in love with you properly, Taejayam admitted, equally stunned. I own this entire resort. I got lost in my own hallway. You did, Najayam Su agreed, entirely unable to keep a straight face any longer. It took two of us to carry you both to bed like a pair of oversized children. Why didn't you say something the next morning? Taejayam demanded, though there was no real heat in it, only disbelief. You didn't ask, Najayam Su said, spreading his hands helplessly. You looked mortified and left through the private exit before I'd even finished my coffee. I assumed, since neither of you seemed to want to discuss it, that the subject was closed. I did not realize you'd both quietly decided you'd slept together and simply never spoken of it again. We built an entire relationship on a misunderstanding, Kaima said, half laughing, half genuinely stunned. I told my closest friend back home I'd made the worst decision of my life. And I told no one, Taejayam admitted, because I couldn't decide whether I was more embarrassed that it happened or that I couldn't remember a single detail of a night I apparently cared about enough to feel guilty over for months. You should both be grateful it turned out this way, Na Jae-soo said, straightening his jacket with as much dignity as he could recover. Imagine the alternative. Imagine if something actually had happened and I still hadn't mentioned the handbag in the vase. That undid all three of them completely, and even Eom Ok-hui, who prided herself on rarely losing her composure, had to set down her tea to keep from spilling it. Eom Ok-hui, summoned by the commotion, listened to the whole story from the doorway with the deep, quiet satisfaction of a woman whose suspicions had finally been confirmed. I always wondered, she said serenely, how a man who never drinks managed to lose an entire evening. Now I know. He simply talked too much. The relief that followed was almost dizzying. Months of quiet guilt and misplaced shame collapsing at once in a laughter neither of them could fully stop. But the gossip that had grown from the misunderstanding still needed handling, and Taejayam, for the first time in his life, chose not to handle it with fear. He did not threaten Songpil. He did not buy anyone's silence. He simply released a short, calm statement confirming that Kaima had been unfairly dismissed from her original position and that her employment at the mansion had always been governed by a formal contract, available for any relevant party to review. He dismissed Songpil not out of revenge, but for sharing private employee matters and creating what any reasonable person would call a hostile workplace. Instead of quietly paying Kaima's tuition, which she would have refused anyway, he created an education support program open to any eligible employee across his companies who wanted to study while working, flexible scheduling, partial tuition assistance, mentorship. Kaima accepted a place in it without hesitation because it belonged to everyone, not just to her. This is how you help someone, she told him. Not by rescuing one person quietly, by making the door wider for everyone. The program launched quietly, without press releases or fanfare, and within its first year, a dozen employees across his companies had enrolled. A driver studying for a business certificate, a kitchen worker finishing a degree she'd abandoned years earlier, two cleaners from the very resort where Kaima had once been fired, taking evening classes on schedules finally built to accommodate real lives instead of around them. Songpil, hearing of the program from his new position at a considerably less prestigious hotel, reportedly told a former colleague that he still thought Kaima had gotten lucky. Kaima, when told this secondhand, only shrugged. Let him think that, she said. Luck doesn't explain a decade of exhaustion. But I'm not interested in convincing a man who never once asked me a real question about my life. He attended one of her school presentations not long after, sat quietly in the audience, said nothing when a professor challenged her numbers sharply, did not attempt to fund the department or intimidate the lecturer into silence, though Kaima later teased that she had watched the temptation cross his face at least 3 times. That, she told him afterward, only half joking, might be the single greatest act of personal growth I have ever witnessed. Ryan arranged a dinner for the 3 of them not long after, and made it clear, with the bluntness only a 16-year-old could manage, that Kaima would not simply return home because her father missed her. You have to actually apologize, she told him, and ask her what she wants, not tell her what you'll give her. Taejayam, chastened and genuinely trying, did exactly that. I don't want to rescue you, he told Kaima. I want to grow beside you. I don't know yet how to do that perfectly, but I'd like to keep learning, if you'll let me. Kaima agreed to continue what had grown between them, but kept her own apartment until she graduated, a boundary he no longer mistook for rejection. Their relationship, once it settled, stood on ground neither wealth nor gossip could shake. Equal, chosen, and entirely their own. 2 years later, Kaima graduated with distinction in accounting. Ryan insisted they arrive at the ceremony absurdly early, refusing to allow one more important day to have an empty chair in it. Tae sat through 45 minutes of unrelated speeches without complaint, occasionally checking his watch not out of impatience, but simple, restless pride. When Kaima crossed the stage, she found them immediately in the crowd, front row, both of them on their feet before her name had even finished being announced. She thought, in that brief, dizzying moment, of the woman who had once poured a shaking, secret shot of whiskey in a stranger's office, certain her life was unraveling. That woman could not have imagined this, not the degree in her hand, not the two people cheering loud enough to embarrass her, not the quiet, unglamorous years of discipline that had actually built the distance between then and now. No one had rescued her into this life. She had walked into it herself, one stubborn step at a time, and simply allowed two people to walk beside her once she got there. She later applied for a position within his company, in the financial compliance department, and made him promise, before she submitted a single form, that she would go through the same interviews, tests, and assessments as every other candidate. No shortcuts, she warned him. I wouldn't dare, he said, and meant it. She earned the position on her own results, and rose through it the same way, one promotion built entirely on discipline rather than a name attached to hers. Ryan, meanwhile, prepared for university, her relationship with Kaima now easy in the way real family is easy, full of shopping trips and affectionate arguments, shared complaints about Tae-Jiam's questionable taste in ties, quiet conversations Ryan still found difficult to have with her father, but never with Kaima. The proposal happened in the same office where they had first shared whiskey, though this time only sparkling water sat on the desk between them. When we met, Tae-Jiam told her, I thought you were a cleaner stealing my drink. I was a cleaner stealing your drink. You were the first person who saw past all of this, he said, gesturing vaguely at the office, the building, the name on the door, to the lonely man underneath it. Kaima said yes before he'd even finished lowering himself onto one knee, then laughed at her own impatience. I'm accepting, she told him, on one condition. Marriage does not give you permission to monitor my snacks through the office security cameras. I make no promises, he said solemnly, and she threw a couch cushion at him, which he caught, laughing, without spilling a drop of the sparkling water. Word of the engagement traveled through the resort staff within hours, and this time, when it reached the same people who had once whispered about a scandalous morning, it carried a very different weight. We accepted congratulations on Kaima's behalf with the serene satisfaction of a woman who had known exactly how this would end long before either of the two people involved had figured it out themselves. The wedding took place at the very resort where it had all begun. Ryan stood beside Kaima, not behind her father, and when it came time for her speech, she held the room in the palm of her hand. There is officially no whiskey at this reception, she announced, to a wave of laughter, because this family cannot survive another 2-year misunderstanding. She paused, letting the laughter settle, and when she spoke again, her voice had lost its joking edge entirely. My mother taught me what it means to be loved by someone who shows up, she said, looking first at her father, then at Kaima. I was terrified, for a long time, that loving someone new meant forgetting that. It doesn't. It just means the table got bigger. And I'm grateful, every single day, that it did. There was not a dry eye left in the room by the time she sat back down, least of all her father's. Years passed gently after that. Kaima built a name for herself in her field that belonged entirely to her own effort, eventually leading the very compliance department she'd once entered as an entry-level hire, respected by colleagues who had no idea, until she mentioned it herself one day at a team lunch, that she had once cleaned floors for a living. Good, she told them, when they looked surprised. I want you to remember that, the next time you're tempted to underestimate someone who's just starting out. Taejayam became the kind of husband and father who showed up early, not because someone reminded him to, but because he had finally learned what an empty chair cost. He still worked hard. The businesses hadn't run themselves simply because he'd fallen in love, but he built his calendar around his family instead of the other way around, and the difference showed in ways no spreadsheet could measure. Ryan went off to university and kept competing in fencing, sharper and more confident with every match, calling Kaima most weeks not because she had to, but because she wanted to, filling her in on classes and roommates and the occasional heartbreak with the easy candor of someone who had long ago stopped needing to test whether Kaima would stay. A son arrived, loud and stubborn from his very first breath, and the mansion that had once echoed with loneliness slowly filled instead with the ordinary, glorious noise of an actual family. School bags left in the hallway, arguments over whose turn it was to choose dinner, laughter that carried up through floors that had once sat silent for years. At Ryan's final championship before leaving for her second year of school, she scanned the crowd out of old habit, the way she had for years, half expecting the familiar sting of an empty seat. There was none. Her father sat in the front row, exactly on time. Kaima sat beside him, cheering, correctly, this time after years of practice. Her young half-brother stood on his chair between them, holding a handmade sign upside down, cheering loudly before the match had even begun. Ryan smiled behind her mask and stepped onto the strip and won her final point of the match with a speed that made her old coach shake his head in disbelief, the way he had every year since a quiet cleaner had once sat beside an empty chair and refused to let it stay empty. Afterward, gathered outside the arena in the ordinary chaos of a family leaving a competition, Kaima wiping juice off her son's chin, Taejayam carrying Ryan's equipment bag without being asked, Ryan rolling her eyes fondly at both of them. None of it looked like the beginning of a billionaire's love story. It looked simply like a family, which was, Kaima thought, exactly the point. Somewhere behind them, in a boardroom she no longer thought about, there was a framed memory of a woman who had once poured herself an unauthorized shot of whiskey because her hand was shaking too hard to measure it properly the first time. That single reckless drink, born of exhaustion and a manager who never bothered to ask why, had led her not to ruin, as she'd feared that terrifying morning, but straight into the family she had never let herself hope for. No empty chairs, no lonely mornings. Just three strangers who had built, slowly and honestly, a home none of them knew they were looking for. If you believe love can grow out of the messiest misunderstandings, or if you think Kaima was right to protect her independence even when it meant walking away from comfort, tell me in the comments. If this story moved you, please like it and subscribe. I'm working toward my first 1,000 subscribers.